Here we go, 365 Sports. John Kurtz, Kansas City Sports Network, with us on the show today, and of course does a lot of work and has a newsletter as well when it comes to the Big 12. John, thanks for your time. So the teams at the top all found a way to win. BYU late Friday, obviously BYU late Friday, and then what we saw with Kansas State taking care of their business and looking very impressive doing it. Iowa State found a way against UCF. Are they not quite, but do you see those three in a way separating from everybody else?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. I would say those three plus maybe Colorado. I'm tempted to float Colorado into kind of that top group as well. I know that Arizona's really struggling right now, but I think what Colorado's done a couple of times on the road now, each of the last two times they've been on the road, and really just squashing a so-so team is leading me to believe, especially with the way that their defense is playing, that they may belong in that conversation as well. But absolutely, I think K-State has about as much upside as anybody in that group, but certainly you have to respect what Iowa State and BYU have done, even if, I mean, look, you say what you will about the opponents that they were playing and a combined record of 1-5 and Big 12 play, but finding a way to win, man, there's something to that. And I just start to get like 2022 TCU vibes out of both BYU and Iowa State, I think, frankly. But, honestly, as I was watching particularly the play from Retzloff to Lassiter at the end of the BYU game, it was giving me flashbacks to like Hypnotoad in a hurry for TCU in 2022 and what happened there. It felt like one of those types of moments. So you really start to wonder if it's going to turn into one of those types of seasons for BYU and or Iowa State.
For K-State, didn't run the ball great this week against West Virginia and dared Avery Johnson to beat him throwing the ball, and eventually that happened. How have you seen him progress, especially the last couple of weeks, Colorado and now against West Virginia as a passer?
He's getting a lot better, just much more consistent. I mean, the deep ball has gotten a ton better. He had one, I mean, he should have been over 300 yards, probably more like 350. Jace Brown dropped a great deep ball. There were a couple of other drops, and then he did flat out have one miss in the end zone that would have given him a career-high fourth touchdown, too, late in the game. And I know he was really lamenting that afterwards. But you talk about short, intermediate, and long. Like, everything seems to have just come a long, long ways from the UT Martin game back at the beginning of the year, or even like BYU, where he was letting one mistake compound into another. And I think it was after BYU where we really saw this take off. He was great against Oklahoma State throwing the football. He was pretty good against Colorado and great when it mattered down the stretch, obviously hitting a deep ball to Jace Brown on that last drive to take them right down the field in 3 plays to go ahead and eventually win the game. And then he had definitely his best day as a passer against West Virginia. So I know, I saw some pushback from West Virginia fans saying like, well, look, our secondary is terrible. If you go look at their PFF grades, they're all brutal. And I get that. West Virginia is certainly not a secondary that anybody's going to write home about. But the accuracy on the throws still counts for something, whether he's throwing against air or whoever's back there defending. You can just tell his general touch and feel with the ball has come a long, long ways. And they've needed it because they have not been able to run the ball with him. There was not a single carry for Avery Johnson on Saturday in Morgantown. And I think I know what Chris Kleiman's saying in his press conference. They're kind of downplaying this. I think you can look at it logically and say, well, he had an injury against Colorado. They didn't run him after that. They didn't run him at all in Morgantown, not a single carry. When you think about, all the jokes about him being a glorified running back and all this stuff, they didn't utilize his best weapon at all. I think you'd have to likely surmise that there's something going on there. And he's having to throw the ball, and he's doing it incredibly effectively. And so then it doesn't matter as much that you're not running him. The other thing is West Virginia completely locked down DJ Giddens. I mean, totally locked him down. You go look at the final box score, it's even a little bit deceiving because he broke off a long run toward the end of the game in garbage time. Man, he was under 30 yards rushing when the outcome was still in doubt. So Avery didn't have his legs. He didn't have DJ Giddens' legs. It was literally all on his arm. And that's really all K-State needed to win a road game in a pretty hostile environment. So that is incredibly encouraging about where this team is going, because now they have another dimension. They have a different way that they can beat you. I think beforehand you felt like K-State could kind of get game scripted out of it if you fall behind, like what happened in Provo. Now you look at it and say, all right, if they fall behind by a couple of scores, Avery Johnson might be able to throw them back into a game. That's become now a legitimate discussion.
John, they are wildly favored for this chapter of the Sunflower Showdown. Can you just kind of give a primer to folks who aren't a part of either fan base on, what this game means to both sides? And also, I'd imagine you're feeling pretty good going into this one, given what we've seen from the Jayhawks. But what are you also expecting in terms of this annual rivalry?
Yeah, I am feeling, obviously relatively confident, but I'll give the caveat that, I think Kansas is still dangerous here. For one, this will be the way that they could salvage somewhat of their season. Nothing's going to bring back college football playoff hopes and Big 12 championship hopes, which were legitimately there. But if they were to go snap a 15-game losing streak in Manhattan to potentially keep K-State out of a Big 12 championship game and away from the college football playoff, those are your stakes. That's what's on the line. This could make a world of difference in how Kansas fans and just the program in general feels about its season when they've struggled the way that they have so far. So I think when you talk about the stakes of the game, that's really about where it lies. And so that's some of the danger. I think you're going to get a kitchen sink sort of effort from Kansas with that, where they're really going to throw everything out there at K-State. And, I saw Lance Leipold said at his press conference today that Jalen Daniels starting to shake the rust off, and that maybe it's just taken longer for him to shake some of the rust off after not playing for so long. I could understand that being something that's legitimately happening here, and he's looked a lot better. Even in the Arizona State game that they lost, it was really much more on the defense. He scored 31 points, I believe, there. It was the defense that gave it up at the end. So I would subscribe to the theory that it seems like Jalen Daniels is playing better football. They got some confidence back, which was much needed against Houston, and they're going to go throw absolutely everything they have at K-State on Saturday. So K-State better come to play. I think they will. I think it helps that K-State's always had way more Kansas kids on the roster. And, you look at the star players, Avery Johnson from Kansas, DJ Giddens from Kansas. The leaders of this team are from in-state too, Austin Moore on the defensive side of the ball. So, I think K-State will be up and ready to play. But I would expect a fight. I would expect a fight out of Kansas that maybe looks a little bit like it did 2 years ago in 2022 when K-State was on its way to winning a Big 12 championship and Kansas was about a 500 team. And they played a pretty competitive game in Manhattan that K-State still won by double digits.
Spencer Goff brought this up in the chat room. You had mentioned something about you were talking K-State, BYU, Iowa State. I asked you about those three, if they had separated. You also mentioned the possibility of including Colorado. And you made a comment that when you were looking at BYU, some look at their schedule. Is that you referring to people nationally that might look at BYU's schedule? Because they do have the dominant win against K-State.
Well, I meant in terms of Saturday. If you look at the games that Iowa State and BYU played on Saturday, they were not against, great opponent. The combined record, I think, was 1-5 of Oklahoma State and UCF in the conference. As a whole, but look, BYU, because I think if you were arguing resume right now, who do you power rank number one, for instance, in the Big 12? If you're looking at Iowa State and BYU, I think you could say that BYU has the better resume, but I think what a lot of people look at it and say, and I tend to be one of these, is I feel like Iowa State has a higher ceiling, and I feel like Iowa State has more ways to beat you, mainly just because I think their passing game is a little bit more dynamic, and that's why, even if you look at the last two drives of those games, it was a bit of a struggle for BYU. They got there, and Darius Laster made an incredible play. Jake Retzloff made some incredible plays, but it was a little more sluggish down the field. Man, Iowa State got the ball at the 20-yard line and just went right through the UCF defense like hot butter, like a knife in hot butter, just straight to the end zone. It was so predictable, very, very easy. Maybe helped out by a bit of a controversial pass interference call, but I'm not sure that mattered. I think Iowa State was going to punch that in anyway. So, kind of a tangent there based on your discussion, but I would not knock the BYU schedule at all. And I think it's a great thing for the league if these teams keep winning. If those three that you mentioned and Colorado, all those teams keep winning it's going to be harder and harder to keep multiple teams out of the playoff from the Big 12. So I'm certainly not going to be the one that's going to schedule watch or knock anyone from the Big 12 there.
Well, John, you laid out how they can make things interesting, and the most obvious way is obviously for BYU and Iowa State to win out. But how much do you feel like the Big 12 is battling a perception problem currently? Because there are arguments to be made about the top 25 and sort of where they're being positioned of right there at the back end of the top 10 and getting leaped over by, a team here and there. How much do you have some concern for the narrative already kind of being put in place nationally about the Big 12 and how deserving they are to have more than one team?
Yeah, I'm going to preface what I'm about to say by saying that I am somebody who's very much, I wouldn't say like bought into. I am just very skeptical in general about the treatment that the Big 12 will receive because, you guys know we've been through years and years of this and treated unfairly a lot of times. You guys lived through the 2014 college football playoff and everything that happened there with Baylor and TCU. There's a lot of trauma there. And also, we all follow on a daily basis how the sport is evolving and how much power is just tilted. The axis of power is just completely tilted toward the SEC and the Big 10. But with all that being said, I actually got some pretty good pushback from a listener and reader this weekend when I was kind of making the same point. I was shout out to my guy Cole Manbeck, who hosts the 3 Mile podcast with me. I was sort of talking him down, like he was laying out: is there a scenario where K-State wins out but doesn't get to the Big 12 championship game, and then would they get in as an at-large? And I just said, dude, I am not trusting a Big 12 at-large getting in at all under any circumstance. And I got a little pushback, and they were like, look, if you go back and look, I'm trying to remember the specific stat, but it was like, I believe the stat was that in the playoff era, no Power 5 team that's finished with just one loss has been ranked lower than 7th. And both times the team was ranked number 7, it was actually Ohio State. And then I was like, 2 years ago, K-State was 9-3 at the end of the regular season, and they were still ranked in the top 10 of the college football playoff rankings. So we do actually have some evidence that would suggest that the committee will be a little bit more objective and perhaps a little kinder to the Big 12 than like an AP poll voter would be, or certainly just a national talking head or a pundit that covers college football. So I'm slightly more optimistic because of that. And I think what I had to remind myself is, look, as much as Sankey and Petiti have all the power right now, there's a reason that they're sitting around talking about, hey, do we need to get rid of a college football playoff selection committee? That's a part of what they're discussing is like, we may need to just do away with this committee because they don't want to have to worry about any of that. So as ridiculous as it sounds, they may be a little bit worried about what the treatment is going to be there for this playoff. And so we may get changes because of it. We may see the 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever they want to do, auto bids to the college football playoff happen in response to the Big 12 perhaps getting multiple teams in this year. But the playoff committee actually may be more open to it than what we all think right now. So I'm going to be cautiously optimistic on that front.
Well, I know this is that everybody needs to run the table until they play each other, right? Iowa State, K-State, BYU, and a couple of them don't. So they can't afford that. If going in that your resume is going to be looked at a little bit differently than others, then you can't lose. You just whether that's right, fair, or wrong, and it just kind of seems to be the case. And I know that's hard to do because that conference, we just had a guest on with Mark Schipper. He said he doesn't, what did he say? That he doesn't know if the Big 12 is deep, but it's wide.
Yeah.
Like there's just so many teams that can beat each other, even if there's a couple of 3 or 4 that seem like they're near the top. Just, you can't lose. And whether that's fair or not, you can't lose because we know, John, in the NCAA men's basketball tournament, the Big 12 has been given favoritism, right? And then we've seen some teams get in the tournament, and they've blown a tire pretty early.
Yeah, and you're right. It's not always going to be fair, but I think a good case study in this, I keep bringing them up, but TCU from 2 years ago.
Yep.
People talked about them the whole way through. Like, okay, you're kicking a last-minute field goal to beat Baylor there. I think they had 5 one-score wins. There were a lot of close games. They were also getting the luck of like a starting quarterback seemed to be out every single week that they were playing a team that year, and everybody talked about it. But then at the end of the season, they were 12-0. And what are you going to do with them at that point? They did lose a tight Big 12 championship game, but they basically forced the hand of the committee and everybody. And then what did they do? They wouldn't beat Michigan. Mm-hmm. They were the only team to beat Michigan at the start of this season. They were the last team to beat Michigan when they were the defending national champs. So you can do it. I mean, you can make some noise and do it, but you have to take the choice really out of their hands. And I think back to your point, yeah, that's it. BYU, whether it's by hook or by crook, I mean, however you're doing it, just continue to win games. And yeah, Farmageddon needs to be a massive, massive game for the league. That one could really, really help if both K-State and Iowa State win out until that point.
John, just a brief basketball question. Media days are this week. Kansas State has done some work, as everybody has, but Jerome Tang's portal haul, impressive this year. How quickly do you think he can get all these guys to play together?
Well, that's really the question. I don't doubt any of the talent there at all. I think this year, even before the Naquan Tomlin situation and Quez Glover and everything that happened to really hurt K-State's roster, kind of bottom it out, I still think on paper this roster looks much more talented than what they had last year. And look, NIL has helped a lot with that. Jerome Tang has been incredibly aggressive, doing all sorts of NIL fundraising events to make sure that they had what they needed to go out and put that roster together. It's not the most, if you were designing it from scratch and just picking whatever players you wanted, they just have so many like big guys and lots of length, maybe a little thinner in the backcourt. It's not exactly the way you'd probably configure a roster, but there's a ton of talent and different creative ways you can use all of it. And that will be the question. How does it all come together? Coleman Hawkins is not only one of the most expensive players in the country, but one of the most versatile and talented. He also is somebody that I think because of injury and other things he had going on, didn't spend as much time around the team in the offseason as some of the others. So I know that's been a part of things once they got to campus. Like, all right, we got to get Coleman now integrated into all of this. Doug McDaniel, I think, is about as talented as they come as a point guard. What's he going to be as a leader and a distributor and getting everybody involved? And these are the questions that they are going to have to answer. But I will just say this, if you give Jerome Tang that kind of talent, it's not like the team a couple of years ago that went to the Elite Eight was some sort of perfect, Picasso in the off season about this time 2 years ago when we were talking about it. Nobody had high expectations for that. And they basically had just two great players and a bunch of Jags, and they had to figure it out, and they did, and got to the Elite Eight. So I'm pretty confident as long as nothing crazy happens, they're not dealing with meetings with the university president the entire season. I'm pretty confident that they can put together a really good team, which may still make you 6th or 7th in the Big 12, but you could be a 4 or 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. So I'm very excited. I think there's a lot of optimism. The vibes are very high with that group just because they know the caliber of players that they actually have.
Hey, man, appreciate it, John. Appreciate your time. You, of course, have Open for Business, which is a newsletter that comes out that you write, and what you do with the Kansas City, of course, with the Sports Network there as well. Thanks for your time. Have a great week.
Hey, anytime, guys. Great to talk.
John Kurtz with us on 365 Sports.